Hey peeps, my name is Nick, this is Board Game Brawl, and we are back with the wrap-up episode of my Top 100 Games 2015 edition. This is just me talking about the list in general, giving you a bunch of different stats and different aspects of it you may not have thought about, and also just my general feelings of how the list went this year. So you can go back and watch all of my Top 100, that's all up there and posted now. You can also, as I always forget to mention this, but someone asked about it on my live Q&A today, there is a Board Game Geek list that I've actually been working on the entire time. I posted it on Facebook, and I guess I made the incorrect assumption that everyone checks Facebook, but go over to Board Game Geek or just do a Google search for Nick's or Board Game Brawl's Top 100 2015, and you'll see a geek list that has every entry is my top 100. I've actually numbered it in such a way that there's no spoilers, so you start off with number 100 and work your way down the list, and it also has links to all the videos as well, so it's a nice compact place. A friend of mine, John, is actually putting together summaries on the list for some of the entries of like people who don't want to watch the video at all but still want to know what I have to say about it. He'll give like a little 2-sentence summary for each of them, for most of them anyway. So I thought that was very nice of him, and it's a very cool thing. If anyone else wants to contribute that as well, please feel free to do so. That's a place for you to discuss all of my different entries. So, what are we going to talk about with this? Well, first and foremost, I had a lot of fun doing this. It was a lot of work. I had to do it. I wanted to do it, and it came at a time when I was already just overwhelmed with stuff to do for the channel and in my personal life, but I still love doing that. It's such a fun and fantastic thing. I always set the expectation that these are the top 100 games that I love right now. This is not set in stone. It's going to fluctuate wildly, as we'll see in a moment. All the different games that fell off of the list. There was a ton of new entries on the list this year, and next year might be the same thing. You might see a lot of these games gone, and you might see a lot of new ones in its place, but that's just the nature of the list. I do think it's interesting, though, that my top 10 had only 2 new entries on it, and one of them barely got into the top 10, and one of them was the big monumental, and by the way, you definitely need to have watched the other videos because I'm going to give spoilers, but my number 1 being Kingdom Death Monster probably shocked a lot of people, but other than that, the 8 other games in the list that weren't new were all already in the top, well, 7 of them were already in the top 10, and they just moved around position slightly, some of them moving up. So, as flighty as I can be about so many of the entries on the list, I think there are some staple games for me that I'm always going to love, like Shadows over Camelot, like Dead of Winter, like Imperial Settlers. I know those 2 games are fairly new. They're only like a little over a year old, but still I have consistently enjoyed them, and they're only getting better as expansions come out for them. Dead of Winter will be getting an expansion very soon, and more iterations of the core game as well. So I thought that was pretty fascinating. The second opinions, if I'll just comment on that. I mean, as I mentioned in my intro to the videos, I just love doing that. It's a very fun thing because people, I've been accused both last year and this year of like, oh, you're obviously mocking these people, and if you can't take second opinions, then you're just too sensitive. And that's not the reason at all. People have legitimate gripes about some of the games I talk about. Sometimes I disagree with their opinions, like, well, I think you're looking at the game wrong, but a lot of times it's like, yeah, that's a serious issue with the game that you're pointing out, and I'm just willing to overlook that. Other people might not. And I think it's important to give those people a voice. And obviously, I always went for comments that I thought were a little bit funny or very poignant, and I think that was my primary focus because it is supposed to be entertainment. I'm not going to read, I mean, some of the games that people rated as a 1 or 2. Sorry, I'm just checking my camera real quick. Some of the games that people rated as a 1, 2, or 3, they had long diatribes, paragraph after paragraph after paragraph, explicitly telling you why that game sucks. And they may have made fantastic points. It just wasn't right for me to read on camera and take up another 5 minutes of time. So I didn't go for those. I went for ones that were a little bit funnier. But hopefully you took it in the spirit it was meant. I have nothing but love for Board Game Geek and its users as a whole. It is interesting, though, and I pointed this out last year as well. Now, I went for any games that crossed over to this year's list, and there was a lot of them, I went for comments that I did not use last year. And it's still interesting to me that I kept seeing the same names and people over and over and over again as I was going through the rest of the comments. I still tried not to pick too many comments from the same people for the list for different games. But I was really like, wow, I mean, there are people on Board Game Geek I would never really be able to have a good gameplay session with because our tastes are so dramatically different. Or maybe it's just that these games happen to be the ones that we differ so drastically on. But I thought that was pretty interesting. And it just goes to show you that my opinion is just another opinion that's out there. There's going to be people that just completely disagree with me. And it doesn't make either of our opinions less valid. it just means that you should probably get more than one opinion for anything that you're interested in purchasing with your hard-earned dollars. So we'll continue to do the second opinions every year until, the sun burns out, I guess. So with that said, let's get into some stats and different interesting aspects of the list. So I made a list of games that fell off of the list, and it's very long. So I can't comment on every single one of these unless I feel I need to. Maybe I'll give like a one-sentence rejoinder for each of these. So here are all the games that were on last year's list, the first year that we did the list, and how they fell off in order, from the games furthest back all the way up to the game that was highest up that fell off the list. So in other words, from 100 and down. So, Pandemic: The Cure, it was very new last year, and I like it. It's a good game, just not that interesting. Guildhall, better card games that were out there. Good Cop, Bad Cop, does what a lot of other hidden role party games do, and just not as well as those. Bruges, I need to play more. It was very new to me at that point. I want to play it again with the expansion. Claustrophobia, fantastic game. That was in my 101 to 110. Volt Robot Battle Arena, just hasn't hit the table that much, but that's a good game. Pixel Tactics, good game. 2-player games just don't hit the table that much. That's actually the same reason for The Ravens of 3 Saharashi, which was in my 101 to 110. That's getting reprinted in America from Osprey Games next year, so be on the lookout for that. Amazing game. Ultimate Werewolf Inquisition, one of my favorite games to have the werewolf moniker on it. It's a Euro-style hidden role game. I love it a lot. There's a new edition of that coming out very soon with an expansion. Can't wait, but just didn't make the list this year. No Thanks. Very simple filler game. It's a hit with everyone I play it with, but not a lot of fillers were on my list this year. Ars Alchemia was on the list last year. I was kind of struggling for some entries for the list, to be honest with you, in that bottom 20 or 30. And Ars Alchemia was very new at the time from Japan. Great game. Just other ones that were better than it. Kanzume Goddess, I have increased the number of deck builders I've played many-fold in the past year. So Kanzume Goddess, good though it may be, just does not hold up to all the other deck builders I've played. Freedom the Underground Railroad, no longer in my collection. It's a great cooperative game, a great historical game, but I think that a large percentage of why I like that game was its historical aspects to it, and just the sort of discussion that it elicited. Great theme, handled very, very tastefully, but the game was just kind of good, but not fantastic. Evo, it was in my 101 to 110, I believe. Fantastic game. Love the artwork on that. Love the new edition. Just barely missed the list. Friday, great solo game. Might actually make my top 10 solo games when I eventually do that. Say Bye to the Villains. Great cooperative games with Seiji Kanai, but very puzzly and very not getting to the table very much. Dungeon Run, I'm kind of on the fence about that. I think it's a good game. I'm waiting for the improved version of it. Chaos Ball, great game from Cool Mini or Not. There's a lot of games from Cool Mini or Not on my list, and this is just one that's kind of fallen by the wayside. Okay, there's a lot more coming up, so here's more games. I'm just going to rapid fire them. Sushi Go, Augustus, Rise of Augustus. Risk Legacy, really got burned down on that one. The Manhattan Project, BattleCon, Devastation of Indians. Forbidden Desert, Infamy, Patch History. Lords of Waterdeep was in my 101 to 110. Space Hulk 4th Edition, I think also in my 101 to 110. Quarriors, mostly replaced with Dice Masters. Shadow Rift, new edition coming out soon. Trieste, amazing 3-player only game. I'm not quite sure why the one didn't make it. Fairy Tail, great card drafting game. Ascension, the app has completely killed the physical version of the game for me. Pandemic, completely killed by Pandemic Legacy. Star Realms, killed by Cthulhu Realms, which was on my list. Cards Against Humanity, love it, just haven't played it, or played it too much for a while. Legendary Encounters, Marvel Legendary does enough for me. Zombicide, fell off the list. Okay, here's a couple of big ones. Zombicide fell off the list because I am waiting for Zombicide Black Plague, or Black Death. I think that one is going to be a better version of Zombicide for me. I should be getting it any day now. And I kind of went all in on that one. I got rid of all of my other Zombicide stuff, and I'm waiting for that one to come out and be a better theme, have some better gameplay options for me, and hopefully just be a better experience, because as much as I love Zombicide, not everyone in my group was willing to play it. So I'm hoping that is the case. And the one game that was highest on my list that dropped the farthest, and that was, what rank was it? It was number 17. It fell off the list from number 17 last year, is Among the Stars. Now, this is an amazing card drafting game about building a space station. One of the most thematic card drafting games I've played. Why did it drop off the list? I don't know. I think this is just one of those weird things that happens when you're putting together a list, and where it's like a whole year has passed. Have I played the game as much as I did last year? No. Have I played all these other games more frequently? Yes. And it just sort of happened that way. It's also the case that there's some people in my group that don't like the game. It's been hard to get to the table. And I don't know. As the expansions came out, I just wasn't as enamored with it as I was in the beginning. That's the easiest explanation I have. It's just one of those weird things that happens when you're putting together a fairly random list like this. So that's all the games that fell off. The number of carryovers as opposed to new games, there were 60 carryovers from last year and 40 new games. I think that's a good percentage. I mean, I'd want there to be new blood every year, although I can understand that might seem really high to some people. The biggest jump up on the list, a game that was already on the list that moved up further, was Five Tribes, that moved up from 71 to number 26, 45 spots. As I mentioned, when I covered that in the top 100, Five Tribes is an excellent game that I played a lot of after I made the list last year, including when the new expansion came out, I played it even more. So it's gotten a lot of table time, and that's a large reason why it's farther up on the list. The biggest drop down on the list, so a game that was already on the list, still on the list, but fell down significantly, was Yido, which dropped 55 spots from number 28. It dropped, I think I confused it here. It dropped from number 28 down to number 55? No, something like that. Okay, I think it dropped 55 spots from number 28, whatever the case might be. But it fell quite a lot. Very good game, very good worker placement game, one of the most thematic worker placement games that I own. Hard to get to the table. It's a very long game. That's all. Now, I'm borrowing some terminology from, there's a great Board Game Geek user who puts out a status update forum post on the Board Game Geek Top 100 every week or every 2 weeks or so, just detailing how games have moved or shifted on the top 100, and he coined the term hot lava birth, which is a game that just flung itself onto the Board Game Geek Top 100 for the first time. And so I have that here. I'm borrowing that term. Biggest hot lava birth, obviously, Kingdom Death Monster. Brand new game that moved all the way up to number 1. The biggest epic fall, as I already mentioned, it was Among the Stars, which went all the way down off the list from number 17. The number of games that are in... Okay, so here's the sort of listings comparing it to the Board Game Geek Top 100 and more and further. So the number of games on my list that are in the top 1,000 of Board Game Geek are 74, which I think is pretty good. 74 of my games are very highly ranked. I think anything that's in the top 1,000 on Board Game Geek is considered highly ranked. The number of games that are on my list that are also in the Board Game Geek Top 100, 22. I think that's excellent. As much as any of this matters, I think that having a fifth of the games on my list actually being on the Board Game Geek list as well is a pretty solid. People think I'm often accused of being an outlier and liking a lot of like obscure Japanese games and things like that and weird games, but I think that kind of proves that I'm kind of with the pack on a lot of the major games at least. The lowest ranked game, the game that actually is ranked on Board Game Geek that is the lowest for me, is Timeline Challenge. That is strictly availability. I think it might be available at retail now, but no one really knows about it. Timeline's not a huge seller over here the way that it is in Europe, so even though it's got really good ratings, no one's really talking about it or caring about it. There's a lot of other games I have that aren't even ranked yet, like obscure Japanese and Korean games, but that's the lowest one that actually does have a rank. The highest ranked game, of course, is Pandemic Legacy, which at the time of this recording is number 3 on the Board Game Geek list top 100. Sorry, I'm checking my camera. And I wonder if it's actually going to be number 2 by the time that I do this next year. I have my doubts that it will unseat Twilight Struggle. I think the Twilight Struggle fans are going to rally around that game and give it even higher ratings, just to spite them. The lowest... Okay, so the Geek rating, which is the average rating from all the different Board Game Geek users that rate a game. The lowest Geek rating is kind of a toss-up here. Here's why. This is where things get a little bit tricky. So it's technically War Machine High Command, which has a 6.27 rating. And by the way, I think that's very excellent. No game of mine is below 6. I kind of think that a game that is 6 or higher is always going to be potentially good. If I see a game on Board Game Geek that has a 5, even if it's 5.99, I'm always very wary of it. But the thing is, Horde's High Command, for whatever reason, even though it's the exact same game, just with different artwork and factions, has like a 6.7 or something. And then like Fortune and Glory, or Faith and Glory, which was another core set of the game, has like a 7 point something. So it's kind of weird, even though they're all essentially the same game, that War Machine High Command has been like the focal point for all the bad ratings. And maybe that's the thing. Maybe if these were all the same game and all got the same low ratings, it would still be the lowest one. But if you want to discount that, then Lost Legends is the lowest ranked game on my list, or lowest rated game on my list, with a 6.54. That's a very not controversial, no one even talks about that game, but very polarizing game because some people think it's just too brutal with the card drafting, even though I love that aspect of it. The highest geek rating right now is Kingdom Death Monster, with a 9.19 at the time that I put together this list. 406 ratings, 158 comments, and rank 782. I actually think it fell back to 788 the last time I checked, and I don't know, it's kind of fluctuating. It's going up very slowly, basically. And that's to be taken with a grain of salt, because, of course, not many people have the game right now. It has gotten a retail release. You can buy it from their website for $400, and so a lot of people are not buying it. It's a lot of Kickstarter backers rating it, and I know that people say, well, if you backed on Kickstarter, your rating is to be completely disregarded. But I disagree with that, but I still think that the people who are inclined to buy the game in the first place from Kickstarter are inclined to like it, even if their opinion is honest and true like mine. So when it hits, if it were to ever hit a much wider audience, and maybe I think at this point that's only going to happen with time as more and more people play other people's copies, then you might see that rating stabilize. But the fact that it's a 9.19 with that many ratings, 406 ratings is nothing to sneeze at, honestly. That is saying something, so I think that's pretty impressive. If it, I don't know what would be the secondary there, maybe Pandemic Legacy. All right, the number of deck builders on my list is 13. That's pretty high. That's over a tenth of the list. And the highest ranked of them is Heart of Crown. Still love deck building, one of my favorite mechanisms. Well, I think my favorite mechanism at this point, Soul Mechanism. And I think it's just great. It's going into more and more games as like an ancillary mechanism to a lot of other things going on in the game, which I think is a positive change. The number of party games on the list, 10 of them. Another game genre that has a pretty significant portion on the list. The highest ranked, however, is Spyfall at number 21. I was actually surprised by how many games are party games, although again, party games can be sort of a loose definition as to what classifies as that. Like, technically, I put Shadowhunters and Dixit as party games, even though they don't handle a huge complement of players and are a bit more involved than most party games. Beating both of them, however, is the number of cooperative games, which is 15 of them. Although there's some crossover there. Some of the deck builders I listed as cooperative games are also deck builders. Some of the deck builders I listed as part of the deck building list is also cooperative games. You get the idea. The highest ranked was, of course, Kingdom Death Monster, which is fully cooperative. Some people seem to be confused about that. And the publisher with the most games on the list, Fantasy Flight Games. Now, I'm not counting like huge overarching companies like Asmodee or Philosophia. Otherwise I'd be like the entire list. But going by studio, to put it that way, Fantasy Flight Games just ekes out, I think Z-Man Games was my number 2. So Fantasy Flight Games with 9 games on the list, and hand in hand with that, the designer with the most games on my list, because I have to count everyone who's involved with the designer credit for the games, I'm going to have to go with Corey Kaniska. I did not count every single game that he had involved with, I'm sorry about that, but he was pretty clearly the winner, because Corey is like the in-house designer for Fantasy Flight Games, and he has a hand in like almost every major game that they put out through there. Some games more than others. I think he was the sole person responsible for the Battlestar Galactica game, which was on my list, whereas he was just one of a team of people for Descent. But he's like the lead designer as far as I know, so it's kind of hard for me to quantify like how much input he had into certain games or not, but undoubtedly he's one of like the lead cooks in the kitchen over there, and you got to give the guy props for that. So if it wasn't Corey Kaniska, it probably like Eric Lang, I think, was like the next person on the list. I didn't go through like the whole top 5 or anything, but yeah, I mean, the guy's prolific, Corey. More power to him for getting such a sweet gig. The newest game on the list is Blood Rage, and this is where, again, things get kind of weird because Blood Rage has been available to backers for several months now, but it just hit retail a couple of weeks ago, maybe 1 week ago, and there's other games that were kind of in the running with it. I think Above and Below might have just hit retail as well. But that was the one that immediately popped to mind, so we'll go ahead and say Blood Rage. It's certainly the highest ranked of the new available games. Well, also Kingdom Death Monster, but that was also in September. So that was a little bit older. The oldest game on the list, and as I mentioned before, unless you're taking into account different editions. So for instance, physical copies of games that I have, I would think maybe Star Wars The Queen's Gambit is the oldest. But then again, of games just like when they originated, Cosmic Encounter was from the 70s. Magic the Gathering would be next, and that's in the early 90s, although I don't have any of my cards from the early 90s at this point, although I did. So there's that as sort of a nebulous thing. And finally, by the way, a lot of these different questions and stats that I have were requested by people online, so people that wanted to know these types of things. The last one we'll end off with here, appropriately enough, the number of Kickstarted games on the list are 20. Now, that's not to say that I kickstarted all 20 of these games, but they were funded through Kickstarter at some point, and then I picked them up. And, of course, the highest ranked one is Kingdom Death Monster at number 1. So that's that. That's not every single ranking and rating, but hopefully that's enough to keep people interested. You can certainly go on Board Game Geek and see my list of games there, or just follow all the videos, and then make your own sort of stats, like how many of these, and how many of that, and how many designers did this and that, and make the top 20 list. Whatever you want to do, totally up to you. I'd be curious to see those stats myself. I just don't have time to do so. But that is that. We are closing out, once and for all, the 2015 edition of the Top 100 list. We'll do the Top 100 again, but this is it for this year. I look forward to the Top 10 games of 2015. That will be coming out very soon. And then we'll go back into normal Top 10 list rotation. I'm going to do a redo of my Top 10 cooperative games list. I might do some quickie ones like Top 10 box art and Top 10 artists in general. Let's see what else. We'll Top 10 solo list eventually. We'll get around to that. So lots of cool stuff on the way. And of course, keep track of our reviews as normal. Thanks so much for sticking with me and through all my mad rambling. Have a great holiday season. Take care.
Become a